Hello everyone, welcome back to the tutorial series. So up next we are looking at the enemy animations and attack. In the previous tutorial we considered the enemy basic setup and the behavior tree, the blackboard components and the movements. Now we are looking at the animation setup and the attack. In the main tutorial, the hidden structure took us through the setup of the animation blueprint, so we'll consider that. Let's look at that. So we'll go to lock, AI, and animation. So while following the original tutorial, I created this ABP_enemy. That's the animation blueprints for the enemy. Let's open that. Excellent. Currently, so far we are following the original tutorial, so the current animation is set up. I think it's just the idle, so there is no walk and run. Although the enemy can chase the player, after finding the player location, the enemy can chase the player, but it's just the enemy just slides on the ground, like a ghost. So the walk animation, was not implemented, at that time. So now we're looking at that, how the walk, run, and the death animation, and the attack are set up. So from the beginning here, I think we went through this already. So we have the main state, we have the slots that allows us to play the montages. So we have some montages set up. We have the attack montage and the death montage. So I added a stunned montage since there was a stunned animation in the asset pack. So yeah, because I feel it's added more life to the game. Because once you shoot the enemy, like they don't respond in any kind of way. So like adding the stun to make them more responsive in that regard, even though they are zombies. So I think that works for me. So I added a montage. And then the walk run blend space was also created following the original tutorial, so that the walk animation can easily blend into the run animation, at certain speed, ranges. So we have the default slot that allows the montage, playback, and then the output connected to the output. So we look at the main state. So we have the idle set up initially with the idle animation. Then we have the walk run animation set up. So the blend space was used here, and the depth state as well was set up. So the transitions were set up such that I think we looked at this before. The is moving variable, the boolean, which tracks the speed of the character, in this case the enemy. So once the speed reaches a particular number, then once the speed is above 0, that's the number 0. So the variable, the boolean, is moving, is set to true. I think, where is that? Let's look that up. Yes, so in the event graph, so yeah, this was set up such that the event blueprints update animation, it gets the pawn owner, which in this case is the enemy, castles to the enemy, then At first we set the is moving, so the is moving boolean. We get the velocity of the enemy and get the vector length. If it is greater than 0, that means the enemy is moving. Then it sets the is moving to true. So and the speed as well is set from the vector length. So that's it for the transition to walk and run. So there is moving variable. When it's set to true, then the character transitions to this walk, run, then space, and based on the speed, the character walks. If the speed is higher, then the enemy runs. Then transitioning back. So once it's moving is forward, that means the enemy is stationary, then the animation goes back to idle. Up next, the depth. I think the same thing as well. There's a Boolean set called isDepth. And when you head to the event graph, the same thing, it checks the health of the player, of the enemy, I mean. If it is less than or equal to 0, that means the enemy is dead. So it sets the isDead boolean to true. And then the transition box. So and then from whichever state, whether is the enemy is idle or in the walk, run, blank space, once the isDead is true, the animation transitions to death, and otherwise it goes back to the appropriate animation. So up next, so that's it for the animation blueprints. Let's head back, guys. And the next thing that we need to set up for the enemy is the attack. So but before we set up the attack, we want to set up the take damage, which I actually set as take it for the player character, so that when the enemy attacks, the player can actually receive some damage. So let's look at the player log shooter character in the C++ section, the log variant shooter, log shooter character. So looking at the header file, we want to set up take it. I think that's what I used. Yeah, so take it method for taking damages. I think in the original story it may have been take damage. So looking at the implementation, so take it. So when the player takes it, then we pass in the amount of damage, then subtract that from the player's health, and would confirm that is the health less than or equal to 0, that means the player dies. So if that is the case, we want to restart the level, so we are opening the level again. So that's what the take it method does. So now let's head over to the attack. So for attack for the enemy, so when we look at how the enemy attacks, we look at the behavior tree. Let's head over to log AI behavior tree that was created earlier. So we can see the setup that we have. Currently there is no attack, if you're following the original story. So that means we needed to create the attack task, just as this task, the find player location and chase player were created. So let's head over to the C++ section, the classes. So we created the attack task. Let's open that up. So in the attack, let's check the header file. So what we are doing mostly is then setting up the attack and then executing the attack. Then we check the attack montage as well if it is finished. So we look at the implementation to actually see what is going on here. Alright, so here we have the attack. You can see that the node is set to the same name, attack, so that when it is set in the behavior tree, ensure we are using the same name, because as mentioned in the tutorial, that's necessary. So yeah, the node name is attack. So while I don't fully understand the whole setup of how it works, I'll just explain the part I understand, and how I tweak anything. Yeah. So the execute task takes in some the arguments now, the parameters. So we have we cast the owner of the tree comp, and as the enemy AI controller, and we get the pawn as the enemy itself. So this is checking if the attack montage is finished. So if the attack montage is finished, that means the animation is finished. Then what we do is we set the we get rather the value of this can attack. So if the enemy if the enemy can actually attack, that means like the enemy is in range. So we are getting the value from the keys that were set in the previous tutorial to see if the enemy is in range of the player. So if the enemy is in range of the player, then that means the can attack is true, and then we execute this attack. So let's look at what's inside of this attack method in the enemy class. So we'll look at the enemy, and we'll look at the setup of the attack method. So this is the attack method. So we have some basic checks of to prevent errors, checking the animation instance, the montage, the attack montage. Then, so the first thing is playing the attack sound, just looping randomly through the array of the attack sounds we have in our set, then playing one. After that, so this is getting reference to the player, so gets the lock shooter character, and then the player actually takes the hit, which we've looked at. So that means we are subtracting 10 points from the player's health. Now, so this other method is for when I was setting up the VR aspect, because for the VR character, it's not using this player character, this log shooter character. So I'll explain that when doing the breakdown of the VR platform setup. So that's it for the attack on the player. So the attack is set up, and then it returns if it's succeeded. Yeah, I don't fully understand this, like EBT no result, so I'll look into it later. But for the aspect that was challenging, I think it was straightforward, so there were no challenges following tutorial on this aspect. So this attack montage finish, I think, was used here. So all it does is get the animation instance and then returns if the montage is stopped. So yeah, that's it. And then once the attack task has been set up, then it was added to the behavior tree, was added here, set up correctly so that it can transition appropriately. So the enemy finds the player location, and then starts to chase the player. And once the player is in range, the enemy attacks the player, and the player can now take damage. Now, while the enemy can deal damage to the player cannot yet deal damage to the enemy. So that was also implemented. So let's close that out. And to look at the take damage for the enemy. So if we look at the enemy again, we'll set up the damage for the enemy. So I set up mine in the take it method. So I set up for the enemy as well. Visual checks for the animation instance to ensure that it's not null. And we're also checking if the death montage is not playing, because the player can still try shooting the enemy while the enemy is already dead, so that there's no issues with the animation, so that it doesn't, once the death montage is playing, it doesn't need to do any other thing than just follow through with the death state, which we'll look at after this. So I set up we play the enemy damage sound, so that means the enemy is out. Then I set up this stunned montage so that we can visually see that as well, not just from the sound. I added it to the blueprints and set it up here. So the stunned montage. Yep. And then deal the damage, then removing the set amounts of damage from the enemy's health, and we do the same check like we did for the player. If the health is less than or equal to 0, then we execute the die method. So what the die method, I think initially what was set here was just destroying the character, if I'm not mistaken, destroying the enemy, but it was refactored to something different, so that there is no performance issue. So in the die method, the death sound is played at random from the array of death sounds that is available in the assets. Then the death montage is played. So that's it. And to avoid the issue of, there was this glitch, like once the death montage finishes playing, then there was this like transition back into like the idle or like the other animation states. So to prevent that, we set up these, or to actually, fix that. Following the original tutorial, we set up this handle on montage end method. So we set it up, we added it as a dynamic on montage end. If we go to our begin play, we see on montage ended, we added the dynamic so that it checks this, it runs this method. So it checks, is it the death montage that has ended? So if the death montage has ended, then it resets that character. So basically takes that character off of the scene and takes them to another location. We can quickly look at the method here, just above here. So it teleports the enemy to a different location outside of the main game space, just to a reserved location. So, and then reset the health and disable their combat state. Which all this is set up in a future tutorial. So don't worry about that for now. So then this as well set up in future tutorial. For now, I think destroy just works. You can just destroy the enemy, and then have the enemy spawn, for future waves. So that's the enemy take damage and death handling. So you can look at the animation. I think we already looked at that, just covering it again. The death animation was adjusted a bit, and we have the death montage from the animation, then the animation blueprints, we have the death states here. So for the player to actually damage the enemy, so how does the player go about that? So it's when the player shoots the weapon. So since we are sort of firing out a laser, like a line trace, so we need to apply we need to deal damage to the enemy from there. So that is under the shooter weapon class. So check the C++ classes, the variant shooter, the weapons, then shooter weapon. So in the shooter weapon, look at the fire, I think. Yes, let's look at the fire. So that's where we want to deal damage to the enemy. So we have the line trace and the hit result. So we check if it's the enemy that is hit. So if it's the enemy that is hit, then we'll deal damage to them by applying the take hits method, which you've considered, and this point which is a future tutorial, so don't worry about it. Then if not, that means it was not the player that was shot, so we'll randomly play an environment sound from the array of environment sounds that we have. And then updating the ammo counts. I think that was already set up. So that's how the damage is dealt to the enemy. So the player fires the weapon, and if the line trace hits the enemy takes damage. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching this tutorial today, this breakdown of the enemy animations and attacks set up to the end. See you guys in the next tutorial, covering another aspect of original tutorial flow. Take care, guys.